So what if history you never were taught is key to understanding the world we are currently living in? On this episode of Conversations with Verdel Jones, we're unpacking hidden histories of Long Island and why confronting them matters today. Joining me today is Mark Torres. He is an award-winning author, historian, attorney, and professor whose nonfiction work uncovers powerful truths about eugenics, migrant labor, and civil rights, and why these stories matter now even more than ever. So I want to say thank you so much for coming here today, and I'm really intrigued by the topics that we're going to be talking about and how there's so much history here on Long Island that a lot of people don't know. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely. So as I was saying, your nonfiction work, it focuses on histories that a lot of people were never, ever taught. I remember when I was in, I think, fourth grade. I think that's when they teach like Long Island history when I was going to school in fourth grade. None of this was ever discussed. What first compelled you to kind of dig into these histories and want to share these stories?
Sure. I often look for the either untold or undertold story. And the more obviously the more historic and the more locally based, the more important it is. If we forget our roots, right, we're doomed to really kind of head down a bad road. This book here, The Long Island and the Legacy of Eugenics, is important because it covers a topic, I guess the best way to simply classify it is scientific racism that impacted the whole world, that really emanated from a place in a facility less than 10 miles from where we sit today, which really makes it all that more important.
Absolutely. It's like tangible. It's right here,
Absolutely.
right? So for people who don't know what eugenics is, never heard of it, or may know a little bit about it, and can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. And by trade, I'm a labor attorney. I'm not a scientist. And it took me a great amount of time to research and study and break down the system and decode it, really. In short, eugenics was the 20th century pseudoscience, the belief that we could breed better human beings, right? Imagine humans, we could breed racehorses and grow perfect flowers. The belief was we could do that. Couldn't we do the same with human beings? Now, it sounds good. It's it wasn't a new story. It goes back to the ancient Romans who had written about this and the beliefs.
Oh, wow.
The problem is, what do you do with those who fall below the cut? Those who are not perfect. And that's where the true danger came, which is also known as negative eugenics. And really, the book really covers a lot of that dark history, because that's the real danger of who sets the bar and what do you do with those below the bar.
So it's taking a look at, and from, I read, some of the, overview in the context of the book, doing studies on individuals who were perceived to the scientists as below the bar, correct?
Trying to create, if you will, the master race here in America 40 years before the Nazis even entered the scene. This is all pre-age of DNA and the gene code in the 1960s. So largely it was based on assumptions, and of course biased and racist assumptions, and also classist assumptions on what should be good for society.
Wow. As you research this book, and this is heavily researched, and people need to understand that. These are not things that you're just, talking about because you have an interest in it, but you do, but they're heavily researched. And the genesis, and we were just talking a little bit off camera, the genesis of a lot of things are right here on Long Island, which is very interesting. So it's a great place to uncover or have people discover these histories that are somewhat hidden. But as you researched and you were putting this book together, what most changed the way you personally understood Long Island's history?
It's interesting, and thank you for noticing, and I pay great attention to detail and research, and that's the attorney in me, the training I have, the historian. I'm very, very fervent in how I go about my research. With this history specifically, and again, we can look at it locally, but also really just globally. Right? The elitist attitudes and the racist attitudes and assumptions of what should be good and perfect and so forth. When you think about these kind of these kind of assumptions. What I was surprised most about the book really are two things. One, first was that going in, I had the mistaken belief that this was some fringe quackery, a few doctors in a side room. Hardly the case. Eugenics was widespread. I call it the rage of the age. It was taught in over 300 colleges. Wow. It was supported by every president from Roosevelt to Hoover. It was even in religion and movies and cinema and culture.
Wow.
Eugenics was the rage of the age. People really believed in this.
And just for context, what years are we talking about?
Generally from 1900 or 1910 when the Eugenics Record Office opened, right until the eve of the onset of World War II. Wow. 1930. So that 30-year window created a movement that really, in some degree, spans today. It was kind of based on this idea, false, wicked, if you will, racist, classist ideals. The other was that people, when you think of this history and you think about the dark history of the Nazis and Nazi Germany, the false belief is that the Nazis were onto this and they kind of turned this on to us. Completely opposite. America led the way. This is no doubt was made in America, perfected largely by one man, Charles Benedict Davenport, Connecticut-born scientist, lived and died here on Long Island, Cold Spring Harbor.
Wow.
And he led a movement and a scientific movement and a mass media propaganda movement, the likes of which really is hardly seen in humanity. To have people really believe at such a point that this was the way forward. This is the cutting edge science. This is going to save humanity.
Oh my goodness gracious. And it's interesting that you said that, because just before we came here today, my daughter and my husband and I were having a conversation in reference to the Nazis having a blueprint.
Yeah, that's right.
And that blueprint came from here.
Absolutely. They followed it to a T.
They followed it to a T, but they had to figure out how to differentiate, because there was not a difference in race.
They actually, the Nazis didn't need much. They were going to do what they were going to do. Sadly, history shows us. But this almost gave them the veneer of science, a cover, to do what they wanted to do under the backbone of it's science. It's proven. On your shores in America, in fact, in Nuremberg, in those trials after World War II, they cited the Americans' work as a defense to their atrocities toward the Holocaust.
Wow.
Frightening.
Ooh. Wow. So as both a historian and an attorney, that's a great match, especially when you were talking about the research and all of that. How do you see the law being used historically as a tool for protection in some cases and oppression in others?
Well, modern times has me thinking a lot, sadly. I think that the law is typically the bastion of last hope. First hope. Yeah. It should be the ultimate guardrail. And I think generally, at least in America, it has been. I think it has questions, it bends, it yields. Certainly in this era, a lot of the laws, when we're talking about sterilization laws, eugenic sterilization laws, which are compulsory sterilization of people who would forever deny them the right to have children. I'm talking bring you in, strap you down, sterilize you against your will. Wow. And that happened to countless people in the name of eugenics. And I think of in the book talks about the Buck v. Bell Supreme Court case in 1927, which did just that. It ruled that a woman from Virginia can be sterilized against her will based on eugenics. That decision's never been reversed. It's still on the books. And many states still have sterilization laws where appropriate, and the laws are a little more stringent these days, thankfully, but they are still there. And I often fear what happens if those laws get weakened and politicians have their way and have ulterior motives. So we hope and pray that the law stays and holds the course for either side, just in general, that it has a overall moral compass and protects the public from, keeps the greater good.
Right. And what we're seeing today is the challenge of these laws and what was, so to speak, past precedent, and how it can, you said, bend and change, and it just depends how it's interpreted. So that's...
And also influence, that you think about this Buck v. Bell, the 8-1 decision where the court was convincingly persuaded that eugenics was right. Wow. We know now it was debunked. It was completely false science. Wow. Yet that is still on the books. That's still a legitimate holding decision.
Wow. It is scary.
Indeed.
Your book really, and your other work, your other nonfiction work, it really sheds a light on the histories, and as you said in the beginning, so we hopefully won't go down the same path
Yeah.
right?
And again, having those overarching guardrails are
Right.
important, and usually the law is the one to do that.
And we do see that.
Yes.
We do see that.
Yes.
So you're a professor, and you teach labor studies, public history, and you were saying that you also teach, or you're going to be teaching eugenics as well. How do students typically react when they learn about this material, and what questions do they kind of start talking about or thinking about, and making connections to present day?
Well, starting next week, in fact, the spring semester at Hofstra University, I'm teaching a course on eugenics in the American working class. It is brand new.
Okay.
It took me a while to design, a long time. And the students so far who've signed up, they seem excited. They've already contacted me. But I have given several discussions and lectures on this book at various universities.
Got it.
Now, typically when you go there, you see a bunch of freshmen and phones. They're into their phones. They're looking. When I tell you, hundreds of students, phone down, head up, fully engaged, very curious and dismayed about this history. And that encourages me because one is they're eager to learn it, but also perhaps there's this innate fear that these kind of tones and things can come back.
Right.
And I think that that's encouraging because my overarching goal is to educate. And if they're learning, then hopefully that continues the cycle of education.
And education is so key, right? If you lack that knowledge, you make these assumptions without knowing the facts.
Absolutely.
You know, it's an easy thing to say, but maybe sometimes it's harder in practice.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. And then there's always those conflicts of what to do with, if your job is on the line and your boss is telling you certain things, and
Right.
you may want to, the way you work may have different implications than what you believe is right and wrong.
true.
And there's always those kind of elements. There's moral compasses and practical compasses.
Absolutely.
People need their jobs.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Long Island migrant labor camps, Dust for Blood.
Yes.
You document the lived realities of migrant workers. In this work, what really stood out to you, and when you were researching this book, and what years are we talking about?
Yeah, that book was released in 2021. It covers the history from right during World War II, 1943, till generally the end of the century, 2000.
Wow.
And it covers what I found most astonishing about that history in that book is it's the only book to ever cover this history. Half a century, thousands of people affected 90 miles from New York City, and no one has talked about it. And I understood partly, I think there was a great amount of fear and political pressure, and a lot of the areas and towns implicated were, mostly rural and still are to some degree agricultural. And it wasn't the proper thing to talk about publicly. Maybe it was a history they hoped would go away. That became even more my mission. The more I learned, the greater my obligation grew to tell it. I had no constraints to not share that history. And it really goes back, again, from 1940s through 2000. And it really covers a really dark, deep amount of human exploitation, crime, murder, fires, deaths, negligence. And also, it didn't just cover from the workers' perspective, who, by the way, despite the name, were almost all U.S. citizens. They came from the South, all parts of the U.S. South, and they were treated in a way that you would not fathom that U.S. citizens would have been treated. They were cheap labor, they were exploited labor, and the farmers and the growers in the industry just cared for profit, as typically they do a lot of times still today.
That's interesting, the point that, they came from the South, they were U.S. citizens, because anytime you think migrants, you really don't think that.
That's right.
So that's very interesting. So many of the systems that you write about, exclusion and exploitation, who gets protected, who doesn't, still show up in modern debates. Where do you see the clearest connections between history and today's social and political landscape?
Well, I'll tell you, with Dust for Blood, farm workers are still, as of this day, excluded from federal labor law protections. Now, there is a New York statute, a New York labor law that passed in 2019, 80 years after this history happened. So there are some protections like California had from the 70s, and the federal government, as part of the New Deal, they simply tossed the farm workers, the agricultural workers, on the greatest fed nation on earth, just tossed them to the side and left them to the wolves, if you will, the predatory wolves, the profiteers, the companies, the corporations. And if you imagine the hazards, which I never imagined the difficulties of farm work. People have this romanticized view. You go, you pick apples, you go, you farm pumpkins. The backbreaking work, the occupational hazards, the unrelenting weather, the no protections, no ability to advocate any change because you're not a citizen, at least of that state.
Right.
And they would go from state to state, all the way up to upstate New York, back to Florida, and come back to the same route again. They literally call it the East Coast Migrant Stream. And, all along, there's where a case where the laws failed them.
Right.
There were no federal laws and state laws to protect them at those times. And, it just really led to all of these calamities on a really mass scale.
And how does that, what is the through line to that, like today? Because you said 2019.
Yeah.
So it really hasn't changed much.
Sure. And I'm a labor attorney. I represent the Teamsters Union, truckers, drivers, skilled maintenance, people who benefit from the representations of labor unions. These workers, yes, they can organize now. The farm workers now on the vineyards, which were the potato farms back in the day, still have their challenges. And those kind of, being on that bottom rung, if you will, of the labor pool really hasn't changed much. And there's still a lot of calamities, despite laws that may or may not be in place of how they can implement them and work in their favor or not. So, these are the kind of things. And when you think about on a mass scale, we talk about, certainly in modern times, about deportation. And, especially a lot of these workers are farm workers. Right. There's going to be scores of empty jobs out there. These work has always traditionally has been open and available. It's really, really difficult to, despite all the blustering that you may hear in certain areas and states and whatnot, those companies will tell you they need these workers because these are the ones doing it. Right. And they're feeding this nation, which is still the most well-fed nation on earth and still poorly treated. COVID was decimating to them, little rights and protections. So all of these things kind of similar. Are they the same? No, they're slightly better, thankfully. But, we have to think of the origins and how bad it was to see where we are today. Right.
Our show centers on turning your passion into purpose. How has your passion for history evolved into responsibility to tell these stories, even when they're uncomfortable?
Yeah, and I often tend to be drawn to these stories. I never shy away. I prefer a better rounded story, something more positive, of course. But as I often say, I'm pulled by the story. I'm tirelessly dedicated to the research to get it right. I will not let any biases I may have influence my work. The purpose of the work is to educate, to share, to illuminate. When I did Dust for Blood, I talked to many people, including farmers and relatives of farmers, and some workers and relatives of workers, and people in the industry. And I wanted input from all sides, so I can make a proper summation on what really happened here. And then I like with the eugenics work, I create these PowerPoint presentations. I give these talks anywhere they'll have me, whether it's a church, a library, a school, a university. For me, it's all about learning, sharing. And what I'm surprised and really pleasantly surprised of a lot of my talks, I'm always getting questions that that increase my further learning. I hear a question that I never thought or conceived of that angle. And I enjoy that because I take notes and say, I'm going to go back and look at that because that's a great way of different insight. Sometimes people tell me stories, particularly with the eugenics work, and how they may have, their families in Native American may have been affected from this, and others so forth. And hearing these personal stories are really powerful, sobering, and it reminds me how important the work is.
It really is. So thank you for that. Yeah, sharing this information and education. So we like to do a quick fire round. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Okay. One book that shaped how you think as a historian.
I can only be the most current of books, and right now currently the eugenics work because of its global scale. Although set in Long Island, this book and this topic affected the world.
Right.
And obviously start from the inner local or urban kind of settings in Long Island, but it goes where the history goes. And right now, that because of the topic is so fresh and so global, that's the one that really grabs me in.
one lesson from history we ignore at our own risk?
I would say we have a tendency, and a dark one, to play God. And I could not imagine it more than this eugenics work. You know, the idea of we can create perfection, forgetting what is perfect. Your perfect is something, my perfect is something else, but we're no less perfect. And that leads to the dangers that we see, whether it's war, science, false science, poor treatment of workers. You know, when you kind of have that playing God mentality, you're ignoring the wants, needs, and compassion of others. And it leads to an intolerance, which leads to really ghastly consequences.
Absolutely. So I got one more for you.
Sure.
What do you hope people come away with after reading your latest book, Long Island and the Legacy of Eugenics, Station of Intolerance?
I would hope that it inspires further learning, further interest. You know, this book's been written about, this topic has been written about, but never from a local perspective. And I think that I found a way to reintroduce this history and make it fresh again. Now, I wish that was the only freshness. Obviously, modern times and relevancy suggest this is fresher than we want it to be. So really, if it inspires further learning or research or discussion, or even if someone were to say, I want to talk to you and I have some critiques, that's fine. Because that's, as long as we're having the discussion, we can all benefit from it.
Right. Mark, I want to thank you so, so much for sharing your work. This is your 5th book, right?
Yes.
So I want you to let everybody know right in that camera how they can reach out to you, how they can purchase your books and learn more.
Thank you. My website, Mark Torres, author.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, on the socials. And also the book, my last 2 books, Long Island and the Legacy of Eugenics and Long Island Migrant Labor Camps, are available on Arcadia History Press website, as well as Amazon. And all of my other works are available on Amazon and other major outlets.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So make sure that you go to Mark's website, check out all of his books. Like I said, he has 5 books. He also has a children's book as well. But in this conversation, we know that history has a way of revealing the truths we didn't know that we needed to know. So I want to thank Mark again for bringing light to this history, and it's local history that has had global implications as well. So I want to thank him for being here and sharing this information with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Conversations with Verdel Jones is about inspiring action and turning your passion into reality. So remember, in the words of Maya Angelou, when you learn, teach, and when you get, give. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to share, like, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will never miss an episode. I'm your host, Verdel Jones, and we'll see you next time.